Hey everybody, welcome to this afternoon's first concurrent session. I'm William Melton with the Prince William Sound Stewardship Foundation, and I'm joined today by Mia. We went over her name. I want to make sure I get it right. We were just talking about the schedule for the rest of the day. Mia Siebenmorgen Cresswell, and she's a recent graduate from Cordova Junior-Senior High School. She plans to take a gap year before pursuing a degree in earth sciences or environmental studies at Dartmouth College. Mia's been involved in invasive species monitoring in Cordova since her sophomore year of high school, when she interned with the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council for 2 seasons. That's impressive. Since then, she's continued to work on invasive species extraction and education with the Copper River Watershed Project in Cordova, Alaska. All right. Hi, Mia. How are you today?
I'm good.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this talk. Her talk is titled Alien Invaders, Monitoring and Extracting Invasive Species in Prince William Sound. So I am very excited for Mia's presentation. As always, you can reach out to us through the chat box, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or you can ask a question under the Ask a Question feed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mia, and Mia, go ahead and take it away.
Cool. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Cool. So, let me just make sure. Okay. So my name is Mia Siebenmorgen. Hello, everyone. And I'm going to be talking about invasive species in Prince William Sound and the Copper River watershed. I'll give a little background on what invasive species are, which ones we have in Prince William Sound, why certain species are of such concern, and then what we can do as citizens to prevent the spread of invasive species. So I already kind of had a little introduction, but I'm a recent graduate, high school graduate from Cordova. I interned with the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council, monitoring for marine invasives for 2 years. And just this past year, I've been interning with the Copper River Watershed Project and have done some projects surrounding invasive species education. So, invasive, we'll start off focusing on native species. So native species are organisms that occur naturally in an ecosystem without any human interference or transport there. So these species will fit naturally into the food web, and their presence allows for trophic stability within the ecosystem. Then we have non-native species, which are species that are introduced to an ecosystem through human activity. But these species don't have any natural advantages over the native species there. So they fit in and don't have a large impact on the surrounding ecosystem or the food web. And then a non-native species will become invasive when the sort of natural checks, like the predators or diseases or other biological, mechanisms no longer keep that species in check, and the species will begin to outcompete native species and can begin to alter the food web and the actual habitat. So invasive species are transported pretty much just through human activity. Almost any human-related vessel you can think of can transport invasive species people's boots, four-wheelers, boats, planes. Especially in Alaska, float planes are a huge vector for invasive species. And yeah, it often doesn't seem like a huge issue, but specifically with invasive plants, it can take just a fragment of a plant to spread, and some invasive species can even survive when they're dormant, and can be transported that way, and then they're able to reproduce really fast. So any and every vector can be an issue. And then marine invasives are transported through two main ways, biofouling and ballast water. Biofouling is pretty much the buildup of marine organisms on structures, usually boats or other types of gear that's submerged in the water. And that's mainly a concern for transporting invasive tunicates. So this is a little graphic of what biofouling is. It can take place within weeks to months, but again, that's an issue for invasive tunicates. And then ballast water is the other main way that marine invasives spread. Basically, ballast water is the water taken in by large vessels like tankers to stabilize them when they're empty and in transit. So this graphic shows the process of ballast water, a tanker loading ballast water at the source point when the cargo has been discharged. Then while the vessel is in transit, the ballast tank is full and has all these organisms you can see in it. At the destination point, when cargo is loaded, it can discharge this ballast water, and you can see all the little organisms going into the water at this new port. And then again, the ballast tank will be empty when the cargo is loaded up. And there are a number of ways to treat ballast water. There's actual just filtration of the water. Then there's physical methods like ozone, electrical currents, and UV radiation. And then there is also the use of like biocides and chlorination, which I can send people resources about different types of ballast water treatment if you're interested in learning about that. And I'm not actually sure what the current standard for treating ballast water is within Prince William Sound, but if Betsy's here, I'm sure she can tell you about that. Here I just have a list. On the left we have aquatic and terrestrial plants that invasive plants that are present in the Copper River watershed, and then on the right we have the some of the marine species that are of concern here, but aren't actually present. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of these. So Alodia is one of the first invasive plants really that I think of. It was actually first discovered here in Cordova in Eak Lake in the 80s. And it's still really pervasive here. In Eak Lake, we also have a lot of float plane activity here, which is how it spreads primarily. And Alodia is a really effective invasive species because it reproduces through budding, which is asexual. So it literally just takes a fragment of the plant stem to reproduce. But it tends to grow in really thick clusters and mats, which in turn leaves a lot less light, space, and just oxygen and nutrients available for other plants and organisms in the lake. So it can also affect fish, their ability to navigate and get nutrients and oxygen from the water. Another high priority species of invasive plant that is present in Cordova specifically is reed canary grass. It also has this ability to form really dense monocultures, which is like Alodia, where no other species can survive in the area once these monocultures form. In the lower 48, reed canary grass is used to prevent erosion along riverbanks because it's really fast growing. It spreads through both these rhizomes and then just through seeds. But it has this ability to change riverbanks, which we don't want here. And then Bohemian knotweed is another high priority species here. Again, like Alodia, it produces through stem and root fragmentation, so budding, and it'll wipe out other species of plants and form monocultures, which can have the end effect of altering habitat wherever it grows, often within waterways. So these plants really have the ability to alter the hydrology of different bodies of water and the space, nutrients, and oxygen available to other organisms. So for our marine invasive species in Prince William Sound, none of these have been identified here, but the Chinese mitten crab, European green crab, and then I'm just going to call it D. vixellium are of concern. The Chinese mitten crab are of a major concern because they can live in both salt and freshwater environments, and they'll actually burrow into riverbanks and can completely re-engineer riverbanks and intertidal zones where they colonize. And crab infestations, invasive crab infestations, can be really, really intense because they wipe out pretty much every other species available for them to consume, and they just take up a ton of space. And then the European green crab is, I think, one of the most widespread invasive species in the world. It's a threat to Dungeness crab and then a number of mariculture operations like oyster and clam farms are fisheries because the crab preys on bivalves. They also feed on a lot of marine worms, which can affect shorebirds. But yeah, they will infest an area and completely knock out a lot of the marine invertebrates in the area. So on the left, I have a picture of a native tunicate, and then on the right is our D. vixellium, which is present in Sitka. So this tunicate is also known as a carpet tunicate because of how it grows. But this tunicate is a concern because it can affect a lot of mariculture industries just by virtue of the way that it grows rapidly on different types of gear. It spreads really rapidly and would require people to sort of defoul or like clean their gear a lot more often, and it can have big trophic impacts as well because it impedes the growth of a lot of other marine invertebrates, which can have a cascading effect on other organisms. So when I interned with the Regional Citizens Advisory Council, I went out and monitored for both these invasive tunicates and then for the crabs as well. I would check 10 tunicate plates in the Cordova Harbor. You can see one of the tunicate plates on the left, but 3 times a year I would go out and check the tunicate plates, which are submerged, I think, like 6 feet under the water, and I would check them, take a picture with this little identification tag for each of the plates, and then submit this to a wider database for tunicate monitoring in Alaska. And then the crab traps, I would set out 6 crab traps and a minnow trap at 3 different locations in Cordova, and leave those for 24 hours, come back, check the traps, take my data, and then submit that afterwards. So one of the things I was curious about when I was kind of researching this or going over this presentation again was how might our changing climate or changing ocean conditions impact the potential of invasive species in Prince William Sound. So I looked at a study that looked into 4 different marine species in Prince William Sound, or I guess the potential of these 4 different species in Prince William Sound. Specifically the carpet, tunicate, and Chinese mitten crab is what I honed in on. But pretty much what was found was that there aren't any conditions that will be brought on by climate change that would make it any more likely for these invasive species to be able to colonize areas in Prince William Sound. So pretty much we need to be paying attention now for these species because the higher latitude regions of Alaska will have greater changes, I guess, that'll make it more likely for certain invasive species to be able to live there. So I hope at this point you're wondering, oh my gosh, what can we do about invasive species? This is horrible. And the answer is, for people who are really interconnected with the land, there is a lot we can do to make sure that invasive species don't make it here and don't survive here. The first point is really just being aware of invasive species. And that doesn't mean that you're able to identify every single invasive species that exists in the region. But it means being conscious of your activity, maybe not going in areas where there are known invasive species, and just paying attention to your activity, making sure your gear is cleaned, and just overall keeping an eye out for species that you may not recognize, or invasive species that you may have heard of. For plants specifically in the watershed, there are a number of resources for reporting invasives. I have a resource linked for the Copper River Watershed Project that has an online portal, so you can report invasive plants and help them identify infestations and respond to them. For marine invasives specifically, it might involve collecting the specimen and getting in touch with the invasive species hotline, or reporting them online to the state. But really, citizen involvement and awareness of invasive species is most important. I think having eyes actually on the ground to allow for a faster response for an organization is really important, whether that's a watershed project, RCAC, or the state. So yeah, here I have some resources for both marine invasives and invasive plants, as well as the invasive plant reporter for the Copper River Watershed Project, and then some resources for marine invasives as well. and I can get those out to people. Yeah. Thank you. And I can take questions or try and pass the questions on to someone in the crowd.
All right, Mia, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. Let's see, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. All right, it looks like we do have a question from Ellen. Have European green crabs been found in Prince William Sound?
They have not, no.
Okay, that's good. I guess, where would we expect to, or if we were keeping an eye out for them, do you know any more information about them? Would they be in shallow waters, deeper waters?
Yeah, usually sort of rockier coastlines is where they would be. Yeah, and I think in terms of like an area in Prince William Sound, probably I would say Valdez, just because of a lot of the tanker activity. Yeah, that's yeah.
Great. You know, one thing I'd never heard of that I found really interesting in your presentation was the ballast water. I wasn't aware. I knew that ships carried ballast water, but I didn't know that, of course, that could become a vessel for transporting invasive species. Do you know, like, what types of invasive species can get picked up in those ballast tanks?
Yeah, really, it can be any type of invasive species or species at all, just because it's really easy for larvae to make its way into ballast water, or there's just a lot of larvae present in seawater. So it can be really any organism, I guess. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it does. Yeah, and it's super thought-provoking. Yeah, because like I said, never would have thought of that. And you mentioned you weren't sure, but I was curious, do you know, are there any regulations in place for the state of Alaska or for Prince William Sound for those ballast tanks? Like, do they have to filter them, or is it?
Yeah, I did a little bit of research beforehand just because I was curious, but I'm not actually sure what the standards are by the state in terms of like filtering ballast water. So I don't know, but yeah, I think Betsy would be probably the best person for that question. Maybe, yeah.
Great. And we've got one more question here. How and where do we report anything that we find?
Yeah, so I can find a way to send out these resources, but for invasive plants, there are a number of resources. You can send them to the there's a portal that the Copper River Watershed Project has, where you can actually submit photos and details about where you found this invasive species, what species it actually is. And then for marine invasives, there's resources through the state. There's a hotline, and there's also other ways to get in touch with people if you think you've found an invasive species. So I can get those resources out.
That'd be great. But it sounds like the Copper River Watershed Project is a good place to start. They've got a portal for reporting suspected invasive species activity.
Yep.
Great. Excellent. Oh, and we have one more question, which is perfect timing. We've just got a couple more minutes here. This comes from Chase. You spoke about invasive crabs. Are these crabs edible, or are any other types of Or are there any other types of incentives to encourage people to help eradicate them? Interesting question, Chase.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure. I'm pretty sure the Chinese mitten crab is edible. I'm not sure otherwise. I'm not sure about the European green crab, but I think there's a pretty good incentive to want to get rid of invasive species just by virtue of the fact that they cause so much harm to existing fisheries that we have. But in terms of like actually getting like meat, I am not exactly sure.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Mia, thank you so much. That was an excellent and informative presentation. If there's no more questions, we will wrap up for this session. For those of you joining us, we'll be moving on to 2 more concurrent sessions starting at 2:40. One on the murrelet space use in Columbia Bay, and another one on building connections for Alaska teens through stewardship. So Mia, thanks again. It was so great having you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.